This is Made in America with Neil Asbury and Rich Rothman.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm so happy that you joined us today. We got a lot to talk about, some really big, impactful things. That is I'm sure you're seeing it in the workplace. I'm sure it's you see it everywhere. You see it everywhere you go. But obviously, it's impacting our jobs and our entrepreneurs, our small businesses, our risk takers. For them to go out there and to do what they do is to build our economy. And folks are struggling right now, and not only with the political situation and dysfunction in our country, but certainly inflation. Rich, you brought up earlier about how inflation has just canceled any sort of wage increases that we've had over the last year. I mean, people are behind, right? I mean, if you got a nice big raise, you celebrated, boom, 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 8-9 months ago, right now you're not celebrating anymore.
No, they did that under Trump. See, Trump had actual wage growth and, 1.9% inflation, basically no inflation. But in this situation, they're behind the 8 ball. And it was prior until, last month, $3,500 more for their family to feed and take care of themselves. Now it's up to $5,000 as inflation hit 7.5%. This week. Highest since 1982.
But we've seen a lot of revolt, especially in the blue states, of just small businesses and entrepreneurs saying, I gotta run my business here, man. I have everything on the line. And then they go out there, they try to open up more regulation, more restrictions. And also, folks, we've had folks on our radio show that tried to open their businesses and are arrested and are shamed and are humiliated, and have even left their states and sold everything and got the hell out.
Yeah, well, the sad part is there's, they always say, follow the science. Well, there's science as we understand it, and then there's political science as we look at with, confusion in our eyes.
Hypocrisy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Abrams science. That's the confusion. And well, we separated ourselves. We were separated. It was all right. And I wanted the children to actually see me and hear my voice. Well, I think everybody would like to be seen and have their voice heard, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue into our guest. We're really, really happy to have her with us. She is cut from the same cloth because she is also a talk radio show host and an executive producer of a very successful show, the Howie Carr Show. It's Grace Curley. She's a Spectator contributing writer and the host of the Grace Curley Show as well. Grace, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this mask thing, I mean, it's really crazy. But you look at the blue states right now, and they're really backing away, right? The CDC, the federal government, that all of those things are still in place. But there's a revolt amongst the Democrat governors, and they're running away from this thing. I guess, are they looking at the polls or are they looking at the science?
They're looking at the science. I mean, nothing has really evolved all that much in the last 5 days. None of this information that people like Dr. Lena Wen from CNN or any of these Democratic politicians are telling us is different than anything we've known for the last 6 months. And really, you can even go back further for the last 2 years, especially when you look at this disease or this virus in regards to children. And I think what you're going to see is people very frustrated because there's a lot of damage that has been done. And I think the overall idea behind a lot of this from parents is that it wasn't necessary. And there's nothing worse than pain and hurt when it didn't have to happen and it didn't have to be this way.
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I do think it's the polls. I think the pulse of the nation, if you do a litmus test of what's out there right now, it's overwhelmingly saying we've had enough. And the fact that you're starting to see the working class in America and the average American saying, I'm not paying attention to this. And certain governors and certain elections have occurred in the last election, and they're moving forward, and they're looking and saying, wait a minute, in a few months from now, we're going to be getting out there and electioneering, and we're going to be pushing and campaigning. And right now, the numbers look awful for the Democrats. And there could be a very, very, and I sincerely hope there is, red wave, because these people have to be put in their place of what they did. You're right. We knew all along that the science was there. And John Hopkins just last week made that empirically clear. clear. What they said was wrong. What we said was right. We put America through an incredible strain and agony and angst for no reason. We didn't have to do this to our children. And, you start messing with mothers and parents, and they start something politically. That is an amazing movement to have forward. And I don't think they saw it coming.
Yeah, and I think another point that I wonder a lot is whether or not people are going to be easily fooled into believing, like, this is how the Democrats operate. Okay, so they tell us for 2 years that we have to wear masks, that our children have to wear masks. And then one day they decide, never mind. And then by next week, they'll be saying, we were never for masks. Republicans were for masks. Like, this is how the narrative goes, and this is how they spin it. And I think there's an expression, too cute by half. And I think that's what we're seeing here, where people are saying, hold on a second. You're not going – I don't have the memory of a goldfish. I'm not going to forget 2 years. And you just pointed out such a great part of this, which is people are very, very tolerant of a lot of injustice, but when their kids get involved – it's like poking a bear. And these Democrats have poked the bears in this country. And that's where you're seeing a lot of this movement happening politically. And it's picking up a lot of steam because parents are fed up.
And they poked specifically the mama bears, and they're the ones who get most emotional.
Wait a minute! Have you ever seen a fight at a school board meeting? Give me a break! I've had 3 kids go through school over the years. I have gone to school board meetings. They're relatively benign. I have never seen people get beaten up at a school board meeting. It doesn't happen. So for us to get to that point, you've really poked somebody in the eye. But what's interesting is that I think we're living through the emperor's new clothes. We are living through the emperor's new clothes. When the emperor, in the Merkin fairy tale, would had this magnificent set of clothing made, except there was no clothing, and the emperor was going through the streets on his throne naked, and no one said anything because everyone was afraid of the emperor. Afraid. Oh my God, you say anything, you're in big trouble. Really big trouble. Worse than my Aunt Sophie. And then some little kid in the watching the emperor go by says, "Hey, he's naked." And all of a sudden, the next person says, "You're right." And it's like a moment of epiphany. And all of a sudden, the groundswell occurred, and people, the emperor became irrelevant. So I think we're at that point. You think we're almost there?
Yeah, I do. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I said that to a friend of mine this morning. I said there seems to be almost like it's becoming popular again to push back a little bit against authority. And I think you're seeing that. We saw that with Joe Rogan, and in particular, I would say with young people, with people my age. I have a quick story here. So I follow someone on Twitter or on Instagram. She's a friend of mine from college. She was very, anti-Trump, anti-this, anti-whatever. And the other day she put up a post that was anti-Gavin Newsom. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Now, people are having a little bit of an awakening, and it couldn't come at a more important time. I think it's out of sheer desperation. But I do see that. I see that with people who follow Dave Portnoy, who follow Joe Rogan, who follow Elon Musk on social media. They want free thinkers, and you see it with comedy. People are desperate to laugh and to have a good time and to not be so politically correct. And I think that when you think of politically correct and out of touch and tone deaf, you think of Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, and this whole administration of the best and brightest. And I think people are sick of it.
Grace, well said. Let's listen to Congressman Jim Jordan. I mean, he's kind of wrapped things up here. Good friend of ours. He's been on our show. He really has a way to articulate things. Let's listen to the congressman.
Think about this. The science didn't change. The polls have changed. There's all these now Democrat governors who are relaxing the mask mandate on kids and relaxing some of the mandates, all because they saw what happened in Virginia a few months ago when Glenn Youngkin ran on this issue and won that election in a blue state. So I think that's what's driving some of this. So that's what needs to change, not going after these truckers and doing, they can't bring gas to their truck, for goodness sake. This is the ridiculous. And here's the other thing, Martha. There's the other thing that everyone now understands. Everything we were told about this virus by the experts has turned out to be wrong.
So great. I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, they're focused on the wrong things. They're just plainly focused on the wrong things. It just became so political. They dug themselves a hole, and they don't know how to get out of it. And they're just grasping. They're just grasping right now. But they know an election is coming up, and they're going to get shellacked.
They're going to get, that's my favorite word, too, because I keep seeing it in all these articles that I see shellacked, and I get a big smile on my face. But another thing I just point out here, which I'm sure you guys have covered before, but it was interesting to see it in print, is that the New York Times had a piece on Governor Phil Murphy from New Jersey and how he came to this decision. And it actually cited the fact that he looked at focus groups. So this just goes back to what we were saying from the beginning. They're admitting that they're looking at the politics. They're not looking at the science. And if only they had looked at the politics of this 2 years ago, the cost of them not looking at the science from the beginning is a lot of damage to these children who are going to look at this. Bari Weiss from the New York Times put it beautifully. She said this is a catastrophic moral crime against the youth, and that's how they're going to see this going forward. So it's just despicable that it took this long, and I hope people don't let them forget it. I heard someone say we have to punish them at the polls, and I think that's exactly what needs to happen.
Well, Rich, any final words in the last 10 seconds we got?
I agree with everything that lady said.
Grace?
It's a my cousin Vinny moment.
Well, you summed it up beautifully for us today, Grace. Hey, come back and visit us again real soon.
Anytime, guys. It was a pleasure.
Coming up, Rich and I are going to have a discussion about economic freedom. We got to get back to economic freedom. That's what it's all about, economic freedom. Freedom, 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 economic freedom. We got to get back to economic freedom. We're going to talk about that just in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. We're so happy that you're with us today. I know we're just getting started here, got a lot more to go. And right now, Rich, let's talk a little bit about economic freedom. I mean, well, isn't that what built this country, economic freedom? The freedom to invest, the freedom to make your own financial decisions.
Creating wealth.
And by the way, that means taking risk, right?
That's correct.
And that means a lot of people have created a lot of wealth, created a lot of jobs in the meantime, and they lost it because they've taken risk. And, so there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. For those out there who are investing, parking their money so it could be used effectively, efficiently, and purposely to create jobs, to do things, great things. They're the backbone of America. They always been the risk takers, the entrepreneurs. But yet, Rich, there's those that just want to destroy them. And hey, look, they're not doing anything. They're just a bunch of bloodsuckers. They're not helping us. They're not helping the economy. It's a bunch of nonsense, Rich. It's complete nonsense. They just don't understand.
Well, I mean, if you want to study history, look at Engels, Marx, Lenin. You can look at the Russian Revolution. You can look at the country that gave us the world of communism. And why don't you just look around the world and see the competing economies? And when you look at the economies that are primarily socialist and communist, Marxist oriented, they failed. Russia was a failure. I mean, we bankrupt Russia with the power of capitalism without firing a bullet in the 80s. And Reagan did that. If you look at Cuba, Cuba's an abject failure under communism. Venezuela is the poster boy for the failure of Marxism and socialism. I mean, you can go country for country for country, and that economy, those tenets of how you would run a country failed dramatically. And what was the one country that gave an opportunity for anybody? Not even the UK, with the Magna Carta, you still had an aristocracy. And the aristocracy really controlled, what was going on in the country. No matter what, it didn't matter there was a piece of paper saying Magna Carta. The aristocracy controlled it. The primogeniture, they passed it on from one generation to the next. But America was different. America was the great experiment, as it was called in the 1700s. And we created a different system. We created a system where you have the right to think, to believe, to try, and yes, to fail. But at least if you failed and you tried, at least you tried. So the whole point was the creation of wealth that you can then develop from. And to hear somebody, and we're going to listen to this, say that, well, it's not fair, it's inequitable for certain people to have so much money and others not to have it, I say, and I'm sure you agree, that if you didn't have those who did have a lot of money, investing in those who don't have a lot of money but have a good idea, that's the way to go. And that gives you an opportunity to get your, share of the American dream.
Well, let's listen to AOC. I mean, she calls herself a Democrat socialist. I don't know really what that means. I think it's just socialist with a capital S.
Yeah,
I don't know any difference at all in why Democrat socialist, unless the entire Democrat Party now has become socialist.
Well, wait a minute.
Which is also debatable.
I mean, Germany was a Democrat Socialist Republic. Or that's what they were coming out of, in the Cold War. They were Democrat Socialists. What were they? They were communists.
Right. You're talking about Eastern Germany, obviously.
Yes, obviously.
But let's listen to AOC here talking about economic freedom.
To me, capitalism at its core, what we're talking about when we talk about that, is the absolute pursuit of profit at all human, environmental, and social cost.
Well, Rich, those folks, those entrepreneurs that are sitting around their kitchen table right now thinking about how they could participate in the American dream for themselves, for their family, for their community, for their country, creating jobs, doing all the great things, they're good people. They're good people. I mean, she makes it sound like if you're an entrepreneur and you are driven by making a profit, so you can, have that for your families, to enjoy a good life, to go on a vacation, to go to a good school, to do all the things that you should if you work hard and take risk, you invest, and if you should succeed, then you should benefit from that.
Well, those are
but
the
she's
rewards.
Making it sound like millions and millions and millions of American entrepreneurs are a bunch of monsters. And they want to destroy the environment, and they want to put everybody down, and they want to take advantage of every little situation without giving anything back to their community and to their workers. It's absolutely nonsense.
Well, I mean, there's more for her to say here, but the point of the matter is, what's her alternative? Maybe she has an idea. Let's listen to the next clip.
The ability for a very small group of actual capitalists, and that is people who have so much money that their money makes money and they don't have to work, and they can control industry.
Well, I got to tell you, I know a lot of successful people, and just because they've made money and they're investing their money and they're looking at opportunities and they're taking risks on other entrepreneurs and small businesses, because they could be the next Facebook, they're the next Apple, they're the next Google, and they're out there working to find these and to nurture and to help them and to provide their knowledge and support. That's working.
You know what that's called? Steve Jobs. That's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs didn't come from a wealthy family. He had a better idea and a better mousetrap. And that's where it goes.
Well, Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we're going to be back again right now. Just a few seconds. Stay with us. We got a lot more to talk about.
Promoting American industry. This is Made in America with Neil Asbury and Rich Rothman.
We are back. Thanks for staying with us. We got so much to talk about and great guests, great topics, so important for our country, for you, for our communities. And right now, something that's getting a lot of press, it's everywhere you look, is supply chain, right? I mean, people have not talked about supply chain this much in the history of supply chains as we have in the last 3 to 4 weeks, really going over the last 4 months or 5 months.
Well, I would say since the first printing of Webster Dictionary.
So everybody's learning about supply chains, unfortunately, not happily, but unfortunately. And the lack of products and just everywhere. I'm a manufacturer, and we buy user interfaces for a lot of things that we make, appliances that we make, both commercial and consumer. And the chip problem right now, and getting chips, resin, plastic resins. I mean, just you name it, it's in short supply, or no supply at all. Let's talk more about supply chains with Eric Byer, President and CEO of the National Association of Chemical Distributors. Eric, welcome to Made in America.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Neil. I appreciate it.
So, is there an end in sight? Because, chemicals goes in everything. I can't imagine how many manufacturers, that you're supporting through your association that need your product. And, you are the input, the first input into products that we need, that we desperately need. And, you're hearing manufacturers, assembly operations closing down all the time because they can't get the materials, the components that they need to build their products. So where are we at with the chemical industry, and do you see any end in sight?
I wish I could say we did see an end in sight, but I don't at this point. People are given their usual forecasts of that we can get through 2022, we'll be okay by 2023, but we said that last year about this year, and that's not going to be the case from what I can tell right now. But, you covered a really good topic. Computer chips and, the plastic resins or the spray that goes over them and it gets put into the dashboard of cars or into computers, whatever it may be. These types of things are really critical to everyday consumer use and purchase. I look at things like citric acid. It's a product that is manufactured here in a limited way, but very much abroad, and is brought into the country by containers. And I can tell you, we are on limited supply right now, and citric acid goes into everything. So whether it's something that it's a sports drink, my kids drink vitamin water all the time, or it's Coca-Cola or soft drinks, it could go into food items, it could go into cleaning products. We start running out of those things, and the shelves that you see at the store that are down to the front 2 rows because the other 4 rows have already disappeared, they're going to be down to nothing. We have to have those products coming into this country, or otherwise there will not be the availability of those cleaning supplies that people use every day, or the Coca-Cola that you drink every day, or the vitamin water that you do after a workout. That's the stuff that I would say in the next couple months, if we do not see a freeing up of the supply chain and getting more of those container ships in, and it's not just the West Coast, it's around the Panama Canal through and up to the East Coast. If we don't see a freeing up of those ports to get those containers in, it's going to be rough sledding. And I got to tell you, it's going to get a little better, and then I think it's going to get bad again because you have those ups and downs in the supply chain with the events, the holidays and those types of things.
Well, also, you're going to have a situation where there's such a pent-up need for the product, and the product's in such low supply that once you have product come in, it gets eaten up right away, and you can't get it. Correct. And if you can get it, you're paying a premium to get it due to the fact that they can't get it. It's simple, supply and demand, and that's the way it works, supply chain economics. So what's the resolution on this? We're seeing right now, starting in the north in Canada, where the truckers have said, well, enough is enough. We need to get back to a normal life. We need to be able to let us do what we do, which is supplying and delivering the products that you all need throughout Canada. Now, the U.S. is starting to be very, not empathetic, but totally sympathetic to that in terms of our drivers, our delivery people, our shippers. And so it seems to me that maybe all of a sudden, do you think there's a hope that once you have the working class, which it really is, the working class versus the elites, that something can happen?
Yeah, so look, there are 3 different parts of the supply chain process. You've got the ocean carriers that are coming in the container ships and bringing product into the United States. You've got the railroads that are bringing it in large quantities from the West Coast and down from Canada to the other East Coast parts of the country. And then you've obviously got the trucking component. They're all critical to be working in I think, some kind of systematic process where they're talking to each other and they're working in a way to make sure the product moves. That's not happening right now. The carriers, the ocean carriers, are taking their I would say not their time, but they're certainly charging what they want to charge at historic levels, and they're bunching things up at the West Coast ports, especially out in San Pedro Bay. You've got obviously the rail community that has their issues, and then you've got the trucking community where, we could talk about driver shortage or not or whatever it may be. They're very disjointed, and we have to have the 3 of them in sync, rowing in the same direction. Otherwise, we have problems. That's just a fact of life. When those 3 get in sync, I think things will get better. Do I think the supply chain process is probably at the worst it's ever been? Yeah, and I think it's going to get worse. Do we need the trucking community to be in sync with the rail community? Absolutely. Those all have to happen. So it's not just one. I think it's got to be all three, and they've got to be really focused on being in sync and doing their thing together, because otherwise the American consumer pays for it. Whether it's you're paying for it, at Target or Walmart, online, at Amazon, it doesn't matter where you're doing it. It's all going to be increased prices.
You know what it seems to me, and you just hit on it too. I think you did a good job explaining that. This is, Neil, this is multi-problematic. And it seems to me a very unusual scenario. Everything that Eric just described is true, but then you have other things that are affecting the way things are happening. Energy is in a horrible situation right now. Workers' situation horrible right now. Wages. Not in a great situation right now. Even though the wages are growing, with inflation and everything that's happening with that, the wages growth means nothing. They're 2.5, 3 points below where they should be. And then on top of all of that, with the job market, you can put that on the top, then you have politics. And we're playing politics right now. So when you put all that together into the cauldron, sort of like...
Don't forget inflation.
It's that inflation.
Don't forget inflation, exactly.
Yeah, don't forget inflation, because all of this is creating inflation. I mean, inflation is the agnostic tax. Everybody, you, me, everyone, our cousins, relatives, they're all paying for this inflation. So it seems to me we need somebody with some incredible leadership to say, wait a second, we got to get all this under control. Because you're right, there are so many loose elements here that it takes a lot of strength to get it all together.
Yeah, Rich, I think you're right on, and there's always that underlying principle that if you communicate well, things can get done effectively, and I feel like we're certainly, as I want to say, it's a frustrating time to be here in the swamp, but it really is. I mean, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, we're not doing anything on Capitol Hill right now. And when you have things that are going on that are affecting the American consumer as much as they are with the supply chain issues that are happening. So whether, I had a good example. I was just talking to the Federal Maritime Commission, about an hour and a half ago. And one of my members pointed out that if I had to look at the inflationary cost of what it, would be for me to get a gallon of milk, a year and a half ago it was $3 for a gallon. Today it's $22. I mean, that's a 900% increase over what we were paying 18 months ago. I said those are the types of things that you would think the political folks on Capitol Hill and in the regulatory agencies would sit there and say, hey, we have got to find a better way to bipartisanly work across the aisle and make sure we find a way to help the American consumer so they don't end up not having a job or have to shut down their doors and they can't make payroll and their company goes belly up. I mean, those are the facts of life that we're being confronted with the supply chain. My guys, if they cannot bring in 4 or 5 containers of a certain product in a quarter, will not be able to make payroll and will shut down. That is a fact. And that's not the only. We're not the only part of the supply chain that's going to have a similar result. There's going to be other parts as well. That can't happen. People have got to recognize that this is a crisis that we are now embarking upon, and there has to be some common sense and a resolution to make it go away.
Well, Eric, we were going to give you the last word on that because you wrapped it up very, very well. Eric Byer, President and CEO of the National Association of Chemical Distributors. Eric, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Coming up, Dr. Rich and I are going to talk about what's happening up there in Canada. This is really, really incredible. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are Made in America, and we're happy that you're here with us today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, and joined with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And as said just a moment ago, let's talk a little bit about what's happening up in Canada. I mean, Rich, I've been glued to these stories. I just been watching this. I'm so fascinated by it, just because Canada doesn't do this. Canada, they just go along with it, and they just kind of like follow it. And when you talk about the lockdowns and stuff that was happening in the United States over the last couple of years, Canada took it to a whole nother level. I mean, a whole nother level.
Well, it became fairly authoritarian. I mean, very authoritarian.
I mean, it wasn't like, even blue states were more moderate than what Canada was. But what we didn't know at the time was, underneath the surface, there was a lot of resentment going on, And it just bubbled over, and you see what's going on. And it doesn't look like they're backing down. In fact, it looks like these truckers are expanding their protests, throughout the country. And into Windsor and to Manitoba and to just throughout the country. And they're inspiring a global movement, including potentially here in the United States and certainly in Europe. New Zealand, look at the New Zealanders, they really went through hell this last couple of years with their lockdowns.
Well, they gave up lamb chops. So just want you to be aware of that. That was a supreme sacrifice for them. Just so,
but amazing what's happening and how this thing is catching on. So let's listen to Prime Minister Trudeau kind of sum things up from his perspective.
The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner, or a Confederate flag, or the insults and jeers just because they're wearing a mask. That's not who Canadians are. That's not what Canadians demonstrated over the past 2 years of consistently, continually being there for each other. The people of Ottawa, indeed people across the country, deserve to have their safety respected and deserve to get their lives back.
I guess he's right about that last point, right, Rich? People want to get their lives back.
Which is exactly why they're protesting.
Why these people are protesting.
The whole point is that Trudeau took it away from them. He's such a dogmatic, authoritarian, dictator. That's what he's turned into. And I just find it amazing. They have been there for each other. Well, the point is, Mr. Trudeau, when they were together to help each other, i.e. in their church, they were arrested. They took the pastor of the church, the minister of the church, and they dragged him out. When he was driving somewhere, the cops pulled him over. They pulled him out of his car and treated him like a criminal. Why? Because he had people come together. When people are in a very bad situation, they look for their faith to believe and help each other. It provides sustenance to them, emotional sustenance. Well, Trudeau took that away.
Exactly. And, if you look at these people, they just want their lives back. They want their livelihoods back. They want to be able to work. And I don't know. I mean, I think that they're completely missing the point. I just don't see how these two sides reconcile this because, Trudeau's really dug himself into a corner.
Well, he dug himself in and he's lying. I mean, there was actually one Confederate flag, which, by the way, in Canada,
that's what they do.
I didn't even know what that means in Canada. They're looking at it and saying, what is this? They're not sure what it is.
But that's the point, is that's when you know that they are really, really sweating it out right now.
Oh, he's
worried. They have to turn this something into what it's not, right? And some little fringe little thing going on out of this massive movement of tens of thousands of people in all these trucks. And, you take this really isolated thing and you try to contaminate the whole thing. These are real, genuine people. Listen to them, Mr. Prime Minister. This is the time that they need a leader. Be the leader that they need, and indeed the world needs, to get through this. Anyway, I'm sure you're not listening, but if you did, that's what I'd tell you. Hey, Rich, we got to go. We're going to be right back for another a round of discussion. Very important stuff to talk about. Stay with us. Welcome back to Made in America. We're so happy you're with us. You're together with host Neil Asbury and Dr. Rich Rothman. We're having a great show today. Enjoyed immensely our discussion. We've had some great guests. And Rich has something that's occurred on our show, and we've done, I don't know how many shows together over the last many years.
14 years.
14 years.
14 years.
For radio, that's an eternity. Really, to have a show on for 14 years is
could have gestated
incredible.
A herd of elephants.
Well, boy,
Just thought about that.
I never heard it put that way.
Well, we could have.
We
could have been on Incredible Dr. Pol. That's what we could have been on.
I'm going to have to take your word for it, and I won't even look that one up. I'm not even going to Google that one. But as we've been doing the last few weeks, it's been really fun. Senator Kennedy from Louisiana. I mean, he just has a way of words. And as we kind of get towards the end of our show, it's always cool to kind of hear in from the senator. So can we listen to Senator Kennedy?
I think President Biden has tolerated a lot of this. An uncharitable person might say that his silence indicates that he's, at least the administration, is more interested in Super Bowl guacamole than the crime rate. And the only way, it seems to me, that in America we're going to address this problem is from the top down. Bottom up works too, but President Biden needs to address this issue and the change in the leadership of some of our public officials.
So more interested in Super Bowl guacamole than the crime that's sweeping our country. And I got to tell you, I read so much, every day from various news services on all different points of view. But this crime thing is really, really getting out of control. I mean, really, really out of control. And it's not just like one element of crime. I mean, it's coming from so many different places and so many different types of crime. I mean, groups of people going into stores and stealing everything. I mean, people with baseball bats. I mean, I just saw this the other day, coming up behind a woman and hitting her in the head, like full swing. I mean, pushing Asian women off the platform of an oncoming subway and in a subway terminal in New York City.
Or beating a woman in the street and she bangs her head and she dies 2 days later.
In the drugs.
There are quite a few of these.
And then you got these homeless cities like in I was just in San Francisco last week, and actually my meeting was just outside of San Francisco. But if I stay the night and I'm there, I always go downtown San Francisco. I love to go to the wharf. I love to be there. I didn't go anywhere near it. I have no desire to go to San Francisco. I'll stay out of town. Well, I'll stay out of town. I don't want to be there.
Neil, how can we address the crime situation, and the president particularly has to, because it does start from the top down. When the Democrats are going to approve using taxpayer money to give crack pipes, good, clean, top quality crack pipes to the addicts, so it's an equitable situation. And for us to do that, to me, I mean, that's just, you know what I was thinking? Maybe that's a good idea, because he has the ability to get a really good administrator for that. Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden would be perfect to oversee the program that Joe Biden wants to put out there to the crack addicts using crack pipes, because he has one person in his administration that has real-time experience. And he can do it.
That's
one thing he knows about.
But this crime thing, we got to understand.
Terrible.
We got to understand how it's impacting our businesses, right? And if you see these pictures of this crime going on, they're just attacking businesses just straight up, like going right in there and cleaning off the shelves on all kinds of things. And it's not just luxury goods. I mean, it's going into your neighborhood convenience store and wiping it out.
Just wiping them out. And these are mom and pops.
Going into your pharmacy and wiping them out to where they don't even want to open their businesses. They can't open their businesses. And then you get some DA say, well, it's their fault because they should have better security. And they have security, and they do something, and then they're pulled in because of some civil rights issue or something that law enforcement has gone too far. Or you've tried to protect yourself, but you don't have the right to protect yourself. It's absolute BS. How can businesses survive? How can they pay their taxes?
They don't, because Walgreens shut down a ton of stores in San Francisco. Why? Because they couldn't handle the theft, the lack of security. What company is going to move in that environment and create jobs? It's going the other way. We're losing jobs. We're losing good companies. It's got to change. Remember it at the polls. Do not forget this. You will not forget this come November.
Well, Rich, you got the last word. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it on that very, very sad note. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.